Okay, Majin Mai, agus fáilte rish. You're very welcome back to our Céilidh house. And many thanks for the kind comments from last week. We had a lot of comments telling us that we enjoyed it, which is great. This programme is funded by the Department for Communities as part of the Warm, Well and Connected project, facilitated by the Healthy Living Centre Healthy Partnership, and rolling out to you today from the Rural Health Partnership in Cullyhanna. Seeing that we got away with last week, the same team are back again to surprise you and hopefully entertain you around myths, legends and Sliabh Gullion. So we're going to open our programme this morning with a piece of music. This is Colleen Savage and Padraig Carrer. Colleen is a singer-songwriter from Crossmaglen, and Padraig a woodturner, and with his wife Sharon is the owner of Bluebell Glamping here in Mullaban. So when lockdown's over and all the restrictions are finished, if you're looking a lovely place to come, you couldn't get better than Padraig's place here at Bluebell. So this song is Sliabh Gullion. It was written by John Spillane, the Cork singer-songwriter, and he has included it on his new CD. So Colleen and Padraig.
Sliabh Gullion, Sliabh Gullion, she wears a green crown. The moon on the mountain, the sun going down. Her ash and her alder, her green mossy bough, and all round the mountain the white thorn in flower. Oh, all around the mountain and all the way home. Sliabh Gullion, Sliabh Gullion, she wears a gold crown. The sun going westward, the summer come down. Her willow and her hazel, her birch and her broom, and all round the mountain the heather in bloom. Oh, all around the mountain and all the way home. Sliabh Gullion, Sliabh Gullion, she wears a white crown. The snow in her bosom of white eider down. Her holly and her ivy, her bricks and her boughs, and here and there round the mountain the gorse is in flower. Oh, all around the mountain and all around the mountain and all around the mountain and all the way home.
So that was Colleen and Padraig. Michael J. Murphy said, all my life I had wanted to live on the slopes of Sliabh Gullion, facing south into our end of South Armagh. And I knew why I wanted to live there. Sliabh Gullion was haunting me. The moods of his personality dominated and influenced the lives and the living of everyone within its shadow, even the very fields. I knew that one day I would have to live on the mountain. Sliabh Gullion by Michael J. Murphy. Dome of Sliabh Gullion and of your brood, my soul is a part in your rock heather heart, slave to your mood. Mystical beauty breeds on your brow, sun-setting beams lull me to dreams far from my plough. Wild inspiration flees unexpressed through tinted sun trap, ancient mist wool cap, storing my breast. Mountain of mystery, of Finn the brave, of saint scholared Gael, of legend and tale, I am your slave. So myths and legends. The legend that is Liam Hannaway and Anne Garvey are in the house with a whole new story of Finn McCool and the Callabera. Are you in the house, Anne?
I most certainly am, Una. And so we will begin. This is the real story of the legend of Finn McCool and the Callabera, brought to you by Hag Productions. Yes, you've heard it today, Hannaway and Garvey Productions. On a health and safety note, please be aware that no animals were harmed in the making of this production. Hot drinks were provided for those members of the public who were in the vicinity of filming at the time and were traumatized by the authenticity of these scenes. So if you're all sitting comfortably this morning, cast your mind back a few centuries and let us begin. I wasn't always a hag, you know. I was the one of Cullen's daughters, yet a beautiful fairy princess. We were descendants of the Sidhe, the fairy people, which gave us magical powers. Now, looking at this photograph, wouldn't I remind you a little of Una Walsh in her heyday? Or maybe Teresa Nugent 10 years ago? Well, I'll leave those images with you, but let's get back to the story. My sister was always getting her way with the men, so my father put a gassa on her. That's a spell to you modern day folk, which meant she could never have anything to do with an older man. So when a dashing young hero like Finn McCool and his Fianna army came to our fort, you can imagine the water that was boiled for baths, the plaiting of the hairs, the practiced painting of our lips, the pushing out of the bosoms, and the wild flowers that were gathered and plummeted to give the sweetest of aromas, all to attract the honour of a possible wedding match of this George Clooney lookalike. And so with eyelashes fluttering, the swishing of the hair, the melancholy music filling the fort, and the goblets filled with the finest of wines, the party began.
Well, it was a hell of a party. Me and the boys from the Fianna were on the drink for 3 days. Colin, a local chieftain, he was there with his 2 daughters. Although I found the red-haired daughter a bit full on, you know. So I told her to take a hike. I was sort of interested in the blonde one. She was a bit of stuff. The red-haired lassie seemed a bit miffed, but sure, when you're as good looking as me, you can have your pick. Isn't that right, John?
Well, the cheek of him, Finn McCool, he told me that he was more interested in my sister and to stop stalking him. Well, I thought to myself, you've messed with the wrong sister here, you boy, you. And immediately a plan came into my head. I went to the edge of the village and used my magical fairy powers to change into a beautiful deer. Oh, I would get that Finn McCool away from my sister's prying hands and away from that party, one way or another.
I needed a break from the drinking and feasting. For 3 days, I was racked. And that red-haired stalker girl, you know, Colin's lass, she was doing me head in. So I took an excuse of taking Bran and Sculloch, 2 wolfhounds, out for a run around to stretch their legs. It was a lovely afternoon, and the dogs were mad for hunting. We were just dandering around the outskirts of the fort when I couldn't believe my luck. There in front of us was a beautiful doe deer grazing on the bank of the fort. Bran and Sculloch saw breakfast, dinner and tea in front of them and shot after it like an arrow out of a bow. I went haring after it. The dogs, who were in hot pursuit of the deer, There was no four-legged animal could outrun me, and with 3 days of drinking feasting in me, sure the tick was upon me. And I wasn't going to be beaten. I was going to follow them, the bunch of animals. Up through the Midlands we went, across the Boyne, over the Merhevna Plains, towards the Gap of the North. At Drummondtee, the deer and the dogs headed up Safe Gullion, and me leaping and bounding after them. We followed the doe up the mountain and saw it past the cairn. But when we landed at the cairn, minutes later, there was no sight of it. The dogs were going frantic round the cairn because they could obviously, get the scent of the deer. No one was bound to be thirsty after the chase. I thought to myself, we'd better check out the lake, where we go, for a drink just to get refreshed. So we headed on down in that direction. And when we came to the lake, I saw no deer, but a much nicer offering. A beautiful young blonde girl sitting at the edge of the lake. Maybe she was going for a dip, I thought. Well, I had 3 days of drinking me, so you know the way I was thinking, and I hunkered down to watch. But as I watched, I noticed she was crying. Listen, I'm a sucker for a woman's tears, so over I headed.
Well, you should have seen him coming towards me. We have heard of buck eachets, and isn't there always another buck eachet that outshines the rest? Of course I had changed from the deer into a beautiful, fresh-faced maiden. If it was the blonde he wanted, blonde he was going to get. Oh, I started to cry. Oh, by God, I was convincing. In fact, I probably would have been up for an award if the Lisleigh Drama Festival had been going back then. And so he came over, posing as if he was auditioning for a main part in a play, as if he was Michael J. Murphy himself. So I spun him a story that I had lost a very precious ring in the lake. I couldn't bear to get my beautiful blonde hair wet, and how could I possibly get it back? Could he see in his way to help me?
Listen, I knew there was no way I'd find a ring in the lake, but any excuse to show off my physique and put a flutter in that young lass's heart, I couldn't resist. She would just fall for me. I'm a beast of a man when I'm stripped. So whipped off the cloak, whipped off the tunic, and after a bit of posing on the rock, I dived into the water. It was very dark and peaty in the water. I had to come up 4 times, when lo and behold, on the 5th attempt, there sitting, plain as can be on a rock at the bottom of the lake, was the ring. I put it in my teeth and swam to the shore. But lo and behold, when I touched the bank, I went as weak as John Campbell and could hardly get myself onto the bank. I looked over the beautiful maiden, but what a shock! The sight nearly made me go back into the water and not come out. A horrible hag, the image of Anne Garvey, laughing away, and then I knew I was tricked.
Finical, you bollocks you. You're more like Liam Hannaway on a good day now. But then I heard noises. Of course, the Fianna had gathered that the main man had left the feast, and they'd traced him to the top of the mountain. I had to hide, but where? I looked up, and I saw a cave at the top of Sleep Gullion. So I gathered myself together and transported myself magically into the cave. I hid in the back of the cave, hunkered down, and waited for them to pass.
Well, the Fianna searched the mountaintop, but all they could see was an old feeble man and 2 hounds. They recognised the dogs as my dogs, so Céilidh, my trusty lieutenant, and the part-time Daniel O'Donnell, singer of the day, came to speak to the old man. But of course, the old man was me. Well, after a bit of convincing and showing my battle wounds, he believed my story and told the rest of the boys how their great leader had been reduced to this feeble wreck. He swore vengeance on the Cailleach and her fairy brood, which had smit me with the strick and gassa. The blood was upon them, and after lifting me onto their shields, they rode for Cullen's castle. They laid siege to the castle for 7 days, and had dug at the underground fort like a ferret in a rabbit hole. Cullen knew he had to make an offer of some kind to mitigate his daughter's treachery. Knowing that he couldn't undo the spell, he offered to restore my body strength, but the hair on my head would have to remain grey, which was the best thing he could do. He then handed me a glass of potion, as smooth and as pleasant as a pint of Guinness in a sleigh club. Gradually, my power began to return. My bicep guns were enlarged, my six-pack returned, and I became once again, the Adonis of old. Alas, however, my hair remained as grey as John Campbell's is today.
And as for me, my father banished me to the top of Céilidh to live out my days. And my poor bones are being trampled on a daily basis, even to this very day, as this COVID thing that you're all talking about has you taken all this exercise and climbing up the side of Céilidh into my cave, annoying my poor old bones that are scattered there. But the legend lives on, and if any of you are brave enough to swim in the lake at the top of the mountain, remember, your hair will change colour. You have been warned. And now, Anna, back to you.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm telling you, the people in the house this morning are a lucky gang of people. That was the premiere production of South Armagh's story of Finn McCool and the Calliobeara. Well done, Anne and Liam. Exceptional stuff. It was absolutely brilliant. And the other legend now that has been remarked upon with the grey head. Mr. Campbell, are you in the house?
I am indeed, and thank you very much, Una. And sure, I'm delighted to be back in the Céilidh house. But in saying that, I do have a bit of a problem. How in the name of God am I going to follow that? That was some production from Le Sleigh, I'm telling you. There's only the one thing that could have made it better, and that is if they'd had a good Mullaban man like Pius Turney to direct it for them. And in fact, you know, I do have my own story about swimming in the lake. When I was about 15 or 16, I swam across it from one end to the other. And a cousin of mine took a photograph of me. And sometime later, when my mother saw the photograph of me out in the middle of the lake, she nearly lost her reason and did the rully, as they would say, and was given out about the bottomless lake and what was I doing, and I couldn't be trusted and I was risking my life. And all my father said was, don't be listening to her. It means you live to scratch a grey head. And do you know something? He was right, absolutely right. But anyway, to come back to Céilidh and M.J. Murphy. As by a man, I like to walk the hills and sit on a high rock, in a loneliness never silent, in a solitude never still. I would ponder on the sublime rise of Céilidh out of the valleys, on the magnificent dome of its summit, which houses the two cairns and the lost weeping lake. My father and MJ knew each other well. They first met when my father was working as a barman in Quinn's, the Milestone, and Michael J would have come on occasion to visit my father at home. Now, two things I can remember about those visits. One is there was always plenty of crack, and the other one, there was always plenty of whiskey. And the one thing I can't remember is how Michael J got to Mullaban, or after all the crack and drinking, how we got back home to Drummondtee, but sure, that's another question. He was definitely very fond of the mountain. He wrote maybe 7 or 8 books. 3 of his books had the name of the word mountain in them. There was Mountaineer, Mountainy Crack, and probably his most famous book of all, At Céilidh's Foot. But the story I would like to read for you this morning comes from Mountainy Crack. And it's called The Letter. But before I read it to you, I want to give you one wee piece of background information. The Jem referred to in the story, as in James, called Jem, was the grandson. And Jem never saw his father. His father died before he was born. And after that, his mother went to work in England to earn money and met and married an Englishman. So, the letter. The old fella lifted the letter that the postman had given him, and he handed it to the old lassie. She hoked her spectacles from a cardboard box in the window, containing combs and spools and bits of wool and cord and the like. And she put them on with some ceremony, fixing and arranging them. Then she stood with her back to the window and held the envelope high. Ailish is writing this, she said happily, and began to rip the envelope open carefully with her finger. The old fella was relieved too, and he made a humorous face. There's no gut in it anyway, he said quietly. She gave him a stare. God forgive you, she said. Hasn't she enough to do with her money without sending it home here? I thought by the talk of her and this letter, the Englishman she married was pure rotten with money, he said. There was a pause as the old lassie opened the letter and prepared to read. It's a flute too, he said quietly, speaking to the fire. Poor Jem never saw the face of his own father. And it's 3 years too since she came home herself to see him. I suppose her and this new husband of hers were making it up. The old lassie gave him another stare for a long moment, but said nothing and went on reading. While she read, a faint beam of sunlight nodded through the calico curtain on the lower half of the panes, a curtain which went up in summer only. Laying hens made the usual noisy din outside, and a cart went by, the driver singing. The pot over the fire made muddy bubbles from under the piece of sacking between the lid and the pig's potatoes. The old lassie went on reading. The half door rattled. They both looked up. It was only the cat. It put its head out over the partition, its wild brassy eyes wide and cautious, and then it shot across the kitchen floor. The old lassie went on reading. The old fella lit and sucked at a short clear pipe, one elbow resting on his knee. And then the old lassie sighed, turned and looked out into the street. Beyond her, beyond the garden, a rise of land like a thigh of hill was stretched in the fresh sunlight. The green was wonderful, the houses white as milk, and a man was working with one horse in a field of drills. Well, the old fella said, what's new or wonderful with Ailish? Plenty, sighed the old lassie, and she fell silent again and still didn't turn. Then she said dreamily, we could have no better luck, no better luck. The old fella stared. Then he sat upright. What's up, he asked. He had to wait a while before she spoke, as if to the sunlight and spots of paint on the glass of the window. Ailish and her new man are coming home in July. To take Jem away with them, she said. The old fella jerked him. Then he stiffened. His mouth dropped open, but they fell silent. Ah, well, she said at length as she turned, folding the letter. I suppose she's best entitled to him. It may well all be for the very best. What's here for anyone but hard work and the same old 2 and 10, year in and year out? The old fella rose slowly and went outside in a half stoop. And when she was alone, she wept. So be it, folks. But it wasn't always doom and gloom in South Armagh. So I'd like to give you another very short story. And I love the footnote that Michael J. put at the bottom of this. He simply says, a popular short tale told by storytellers at Fireside Céilidh in Drummondtee Parish, County Armagh, in the 1930s. The age of innocence. And by the way, I dedicate this to all the women in the group, if I may. An old woman had 2 goats, one of which was fairly aged. The rutting season had arrived at this time, and as they phrased it, the goats were looking away. Unable to travel with the goats to the buck, she asked a neighbour if she would bring them, and he agreed to call for the animals on his way home from work that evening. And he did so. But when he arrived, he found that the old woman had tied the aged nanny to the young one by the neck. In the name of God, he says, what are you being so foolish for? Sure, an old nanny like that, he said, will never take the buck. She'll never conceive and have a kid at her age. What are you sending her to the buck for? And the woman replied, sure, don't I know she can't, but sure, won't it do her old heart good? And on that note, as they say, Una.
So that's my cue to come back into the house with the nanny goat. So Finn McCool and the Callabera and the legend that's John Campbell. And so to our other hero, and that's Cuchulainn. Cuchulainn, whose 1911 sculpture in the General Post Office in Dublin is the champion of the Irish nation. And on the murals of the Shankill Road in Belfast is the hound and the defender of Ulster. So Cuchulainn, who crosses both traditions, if you like, as the defender. Setanta was of noble birth, son of Daptera, sister of Conor MacNessa, and son of the god Lu, the sun god, and conceived at the great mound of Brú na Báine, the palace of the Bine. Lu, who gave his name to the festival of Lunasa and his name to County Louth. Setanta shed his boyhood and his name on the slopes of Gullion after killing Cullen's hound and became the legend of Cuchulainn. When Cuchulainn was growing out of his boyhood at Aranmaha, all the women of Ulster loved him for his skill in feats, for the lightness of his leap, for the weight of his wisdom, for the sweetness of his speech, for the beauty of his face, for the loveliness of his looks, for all his gifts. He had the gift of caution in fighting, until such time as his anger would come on him, and the hero light would shine above his head. The gift of feats, the gift of chess playing, the gift of counting, the gift of divining, the gift of right judgment, the gift of beauty. Through the gap of the north to the fortification of Fahard, the place of battles. On his right slope, facing his birthplace, the plains of Merthema, he fought Maeve's forces. Cuchulainn came against them in his chariot, doing his 3 thunder feats, and he used his spear and his sword in such a way that their head and their hands and their feet and their bones were scattered through the plains of Merthema, like the sand on the shore, like the stars in the sky, like the dew in May, like snowflakes and hailstones, like leaves of trees, like buttercups in a meadow, like grass under the feet of a cattle on a fine summer's day. But Cuchulainn, mortally wounded, saw a tall pillar stone marking the grave of a warrior slain in an ancient battle. He staggered to the stone, Cloch Faramore, the stone of the big man, removed his girdle and used its cords to bind himself to the pillar. With his dying breath, he gave a great sigh, forming the crack in the stone as it remains today. From a distance, his enemies were watching him. So stood Cuchulainn, even in death pangs, a terror to his enemies and the bulwark of his nation. It was 3 days later when the Maragon, the Celtic goddess of war and fertility, appeared as a raven and landed on his shoulder. Only then did they believe he was dead and dared to approach him. As Cuchulainn breathed his last, the heavens wept, and the fairy women of his people, came to collect the soul of their own. And the winds rose and swirled and whispered, carrying the stories to generations not yet born.
The shadows fell across the room as I lay down to rest. The storm was raging deep inside my head. I fell into a restless sleep of crazy changing dreams, and woke to find you standing by my bed. The Hinya winds were blowing when you called me. First you spoke my name, your voice was still the same. You beckoned me and I arose to follow where you led, out amongst the wild Hinya hill. The mountain mist had lent an eerie whiteness to the hill. The silvered spider threadings caught my face. You darted through the bracken, trailing stardust in your way. I knew you'd stop beside our sacred place. The Hinya winds were blowing when you called me. First you spoke my name, the voice was still the same. You beckoned me and I arose to follow where you led, out amongst the wild Hinya hill. You stopped upon the fairy hill beneath the hawthorn tree. I thought I heard the lonely banshee scream. You held your hand toward me and I reached to touch your face, but woke to find that you were just a dream. The Hinya winds were blowing when you called me. First you spoke my name, your voice was still the same. You beckoned me and I arose to follow where you led, out amongst the mild Hinya hill. And I am growing weary of this earth. The magic of the dream eludes me still. I've lain beneath the fairy tree, I've shouted to the moon. I am the haunted woman of the hill. The Hinya winds were blowing when
voice was still the same. You beckoned me, and I arose to follow where you led, out amongst the wild Céilidh hill.
That's the absolutely wonderful Bridge Murphy from Forkhill with one of our own compositions of songs, Céilidh Wind. It's the loveliest song, the nicest way of finishing off the whispering of the she as they took Cuchulainn home. So that's Bridge Murphy. So we're coming near the end of our morning in the house, in the Céilidh house, and this is World Book Day. So we thought that we would ask our participants to name the book that they like, or a special book for them. So you're on, Anne.
I'm on there, back on. Just to show, I have two books today, and the first book that I would like to talk to you about is this book that I'm reading at the moment. It's called The 5 People You Meet in Heaven, and it's by Mitch Albom. And it's a great book about a man called Eddie, who on his 83rd birthday, he's a war veteran, and he dies in a tragic accident trying to save a little girl. And it's the number of people that he meets in heaven, or the 5 people that he meets in heaven, and how he has lots of the whole idea of earthly life. Great book, great read. The other book that I want to tell you all about, if you have any grandchildren or nieces or nephews coming up to Easter, maybe instead of buying them an Easter egg, maybe think about buying this new book from David Walliams. It's called Codename Bananas. A great book. As you all know, David Walliams is like the new modern day Roald Dahl, and it's about a gorilla called Gertrude and her adventures in the zoo and a little boy who befriends her. Great book. I'm enjoying it now. I'm reading it with lots of my young boys, 8 and 9-year-old students, and we're having a great crack at this book. So those are the 2 books to me for World Book Day. Thank you.
Ilan. And Liam.
Well, the book that I continually go back to is a book that was read to me by my Aunt Bridget years ago when I used to go up and stay with her at the weekends and over Christmas and stuff. It's called The Crock of Gold, and that's it there by James Stephens, and that's her original one. It was printed by Pan Books, which will give you an idea how old the book is itself. But again, it's a great book, fantasy book about philosophers, leprechauns, a crock of gold, and full of learning in it. So again, I would recommend people to take it up and have a read of it. It also now a good book by James Stephens, Demigods. Again, fantasy books to just lose yourself in and forget about the world today.
Thanks, Liam. What about you, John?
Well, the book I was going to recommend today, just in keeping with the theme of myths and legends in Céilidh, is the Táin. And the copy that I have and would highly recommend is Kieran Carson's translation of the Táin. Sadly, Kieran died last year, Belfast poet, professor of poetry at Queen's, and a fine author himself. And it's a very easy translation. It's very easy to read. I know I've tried to read the Táin a couple of times and reverted to a children's version at one stage. This is very easy to read. And it's also special to me because he published it in 2007. But if you open the inside cover, he dedicates it to my late father. He simply says, in memory of the storyteller John Campbell of Mullaban, County Armagh, born 1933, died 2006. So Céilidh and plenty in there for that. Just my go-to book, and talk about a go-to book, or my all-time favourite book is a childhood book, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. I first read it when I was an inpatient in the Royal Victoria Hospital for Sick Children. I think I've read it every year since, and I definitely read it, Una, to every class I ever taught. So you can ask your Cormac. Thanks very much, Una.
Okay, well, you're all a bit smarter than me because I haven't. I was that annoyed about the wonderment of trying to keep Zoom going. I haven't brought the book down. But my also a go-to book. My book is Wuthering Heights. I fell in love with Wuthering Heights from the first time I read it, and it's a book I go back to. I even know the page that I need to go to read a piece that lifts my heart, as they would say. And when my children were small and all around my feet, if they saw me lifting Wuthering Heights and heading to the room, they all turned and they knew to not follow me down until such times as I had those pieces read and I re-emerged ready to face the world. So my book is Wuthering Heights.
That's lovely.
So we've had a lovely morning. This Céilidh house is getting better every week. We hope to see you back again next week for what will be our last Céilidh house morning. But myself and Teresa had been talking, and we'd been talking about what has almost for us become the anthem of these connecting programs, of how we are connecting with each other and what that means, and the process of looking after yourself and slowing down. So this is Time to Be Slow by John O'Donoghue. This is the time to be slow. Lie low to the wall until the bitter weather passes. Try as best as you can not to let the wire brush of doubt scrape from your heart all sense of yourself and your hesitant light. If you remain generous, time will come good, and you will find your feet again on fresh pasture of promise, when the air will be kind and blushed with beginning.
On the end there.
Okay, so just before we finish, because we have talked all morning about legends, and they were older legends, but we're going to show you now a young legend, somebody who will take the world by storm, I think, before she finishes. This young girl is Siobhan Gribben from Cullyhanna. She is a Gaeilgeoir, she's a Shannon singer, and at last weekend she won the Willie McCracken Cup in Belfast, and she is the under-12 Ulster champion in Shannos. Just listen to Shiva. So that was Shiva, and Shiva's song is about a man from County Down who was up around Myra Castle and met a girl from County Louth who he was very taken with, just like Finn and the beautiful maiden at the before she was the Callabera. But he asked her to come with him and he would marry her, and she turned him down point blankly. And then he started to insult rings round him, where the people of County Louth had nothing, weren't a patch on the people of County Down. So there you are, the man slighted. So, Slán from the Céilidh House, we'll see you again next week, and thank you everyone for coming. All the best. Bye.